there's no expectation, I don't think, from anyone to understand why they self-harmed, because self-harm or self-harming behavior is a coping strategy. It's all to hide away from or not confront something traumatic, some pains, feelings of overwhelm.
It's a horrible place to be, feeling so helpless. But with you trying and trying and trying, it will just be like banging your head up against a brick wall, and only yourself is going to suffer.
They may not even want to share with you what they're going through, and that is obviously the toughest part. So, as a working mother at the time, I made sure at least every evening we had a family meal, and then we would just talk about our day. It's also, as the parent, important to understand you can't fix it yourself. You need professional help. Your child needs professional help.
Fab. So tell me all about what you do and how you came to do it. And
Um, well, where do I start? So, because I wear many hats. So, I'm also a podcaster and also a family coach. So, specializing specifically with parents of teenagers. So, and um, and teenagers that self harm and struggle with their mental health, and that could be, you know, when we talk about self harm, we need to look at it under a broader spectrum, which would then include addictions, um, addictive behavior, um, anything that puts that individual in harm's way, basically.
yeah, it got a lot broader over the years, hasn't it? I know when I was a prison officer and I couldn't quite understand self-harm back then. It took me a while to get my head
Yeah.
around it, even though I was self-harming with alcohol and went on to become addicted. I found the stereotypical self-harm that we think of. And there's so much more to it, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I then started my podcast in 2020 during lockdowns, because I thought, having personally gone through it myself with my daughters, I I had to obviously educate myself on what is that, as well as obviously as the parent, then how do I actually cope with this, and what should I do, but also you just see the kinds of behavior that you would also put into that, like eating disorders, and I know that when you look at the statistics, it would seem that it's more prevalent in girls, but then what about when we look at boys and when they get themselves into fights, because girls internalize their pain and then you see it externally expressed, like with cutting, but you know young boys sort of like drugs turning to alcohol, driving their cars too fast, speeding around bends, getting into fights and provoking fights and confrontations. I mean,
Yeah,
that's all self-harming behavior, or in a fit of rage and punching their fist through a wall. So
absolutely.
so that's why I talk about it in a broader spectrum to educate people out there, whether they're professionals, parents, or just anyone that's um, affected, knows someone perhaps that's self-harming, to look at all the different ways that that individual might actually be self-harming.
Yeah, it's quite funny you saying about boys, actually. Somebody very close to me, it wasn't obvious straight away, but they did things like very, very clever kid, but when it was coming up to their GCSEs, falling off a high gate and breaking their arm. When they were staying with a relative, picking up a bit of glass and it accidentally breaking and them cutting themselves and having to be rushed to
Mm,
hospital.
yeah.
And I didn't see, because it was sort of accidents, you didn't notice it. But then when you look back at the pattern, it was,
Mm,
this is all self-harming behavior.
yeah.
And it wasn't obvious straight away.
No, and it isn't. And also, you're just caught up in the drama of it all, the shock, and you have to act immediately. You're not sort of like in your analytical brain and trying to dissect what does this all mean. I mean, and that's totally irrelevant in that moment. In that moment, that child, that individual needs your help and needs treatment. So it's off to A&E, isn't it? The emergency services, and to get them sorted. Then you can have a conversation about what happened, if you grow suspicious and think perhaps there's something a little bit more behind that behavior or what happened.
It's crazy. So, how do you go about that conversation? It's especially,
Well,
I think, like for me, with that person, like I said, it was a real shock to me. And I was really, when I realized what it was, I felt that guilt that I hadn't been noticing it, first of all. And I sort of had a lot of grief immediately over that and that I wasn't there for them.
yeah,
But they've never
that's
talked
so
about it.
typical. Yeah, but that's so typical of parents. You're caught up in those emotions, and I spent a good year or 18 months blaming myself for what happened, because if I was thinking in any shape or form that I was being a good parent and fulfilling my role, then how could that even happen? And then when your surroundings seem to, and the people around you seem to be also conveying that message that there must be something wrong at home or something wrong with your parenting, you just typically just look to yourself and wonder, where have you gone wrong? So that's no place to be asking questions of anyone else. You have to first confront that and try to, well, get out of that blame. But I mean, it's a natural place that you go to in that moment. But it's noticing that you're doing that, and then having someone that you could perhaps unpick that with. And if you just so happen to know perhaps someone that has gone through something similar, you could reach out to them and have that confidential conversation. Or if there isn't, that's where you would then have to, I mean, online, it wasn't that way 10 years ago, but now online, there's so many places you can go for help, and even with the NHS. So, reach out to someone and have that conversation. I also used to work, but it was only for 12 months, but with Shout.
Yeah,
Yeah, I volunteered there and would take those calls. So, and there's lots of, the Samaritans, there's lots of organizations that offer free advice, especially in that moment, because in that moment, I think the most important thing you need to hear is, it's not your fault.
absolutely. Yeah,
It's not your fault. And then after that, it's straight into, let's put a plan together, how to keep that young person safe, because that's how you can restore your own sanity. Because once you get into, okay, we need to sort this out, you're not thinking about yourself anymore. You're not caught up in all of those emotions, because you have to come out of that in order to be able to help and support that individual and understand what it is that they need. And again, it's certainly not blame. How could you do this? Do you know what you've just put me through, for instance? And believe it or not, there will be some people that that is their first reaction because they feel so overwhelmed and out of their depths that they go straight into that, which obviously doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help you, and it doesn't certainly help that person. So it's trying as best as you can, but not, there's no expectation, I don't think, from anyone to understand why they self harmed, why they chose that way to, um, because self harm or self harming behavior is, as strange as that sounds, is a method. It's a coping strategy. Not the best, drinking alcohol. It's all to hide away from or not confront something traumatic, some pains, feelings of overwhelm. And so it's to get to that. And in order to get to that, it's where you're most helpful when you can just do the practical things like, well, let's have a look at that and let's patch that up or put that bottle away because it could be pills, whatever it might be. Or like you said with the broken arm, it's let's go to A&E, get that all sorted. And then you also have to accept that they may not even want to share with you what they're going through. And that is obviously the toughest part of being a parent, because all you want to do, I mean, you love that child, that individual, and all you want to do is to help.
Yeah.
And if they're pushing you away, you can't break open that door and say, I want to talk to you right now because we need to sort it out. So it's you have to get the measure right, you have to get the timing right. And I know it just adds to that feeling of overwhelm, but it really is one step at a time. And the most important thing is, like I said, making them safe. So making the place safe, whatever that might mean in for that individual, and putting a safety plan together as your first step.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Um, I say to the loved ones of people in addiction all the time, you need to stay strong and look after yourself to be there ready for when the person in addiction wants to change and really need your help. Because while they are addicted, there's nothing you can do, and it's a horrible place to be. It's feeling so helpless. But with you trying and trying and trying, it will just be like banging your head up against a brick wall, and only yourself is going to suffer. If, as long as they know that you're there for them when they want to reach out, that's when um, you need to be strong for that point.
Mm,
And yeah, it's very difficult and frustrating.
it is. It's also, as the parent, important to understand you can't fix it yourself. You need professional help. Your child needs professional help. And then you, even if you're the single parent, if there's the contact with the other parent, it's advisable that the two of you together also seek counseling.
Mm.
So it's a separate thing. So I work with the parents of the teenager who's self-harming to
So
educate them
important.
and to equip them, yeah, with all of the tools that they need. And then, as you mentioned about self-care, what that looks like, how to start that conversation, um, what that conversation looks like, and building that trust. Also, looking at then spending quality time, like, say, because we all have busy lives, don't we? And if you're able to carve out some family time, say like a Wednesday evening, that's our, sort of like protected time together, but the agenda comes from them. Yeah, because we have
Yeah.
to empower them and give them some sense of control in their lives, because you know, children going to school, so all they know up until, you know, they reach adulthood is adults are in charge, adults tell them what to do. And of course that's why they rebel.
Well, as you said, things like if people are self-harming, the behaviors, the drinking, drugs, that is their control. That is the thing that eating, they can
Yeah,
control that. And I say it with addiction as well. When somebody loses that addiction and gives up the alcohol, for instance, they're losing their comfort blanket, their security,
yeah. So
that thing that has kept
you
them
need to swap
safe.
it with something else that's better.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And go on.
yeah. Well, until they're in the place where they feel like they can cope with life, but it doesn't happen overnight. And I think
Mm,
that's also what people need to realize: the person who is self-harming, as well as um, you know, the parent, it's not an overnight thing. It could take, you know, 6 months, 12 months.
yeah.
Yeah, you know, you're in it for the long haul. And the person who is, you know, in the midst of it also needs to know that you might make 2 steps forward and then 10 steps back. And that's just part of the process. It's okay. Don't beat yourself up.
Really good advice, that. Absolutely. I loved what you said earlier as well, that it might not be that somebody doesn't want to talk, but they might not know what it is or why they're doing it. I,
Or even how
yeah,
to express that pain. That's the
absolutely.
thing. It's so individual. And if you think that self-harm starts statistically around the age of 12, okay, then you've got all of these very strong emotions raging through your body. No one's actually taken the time to sit down and explain to you what all of those emotions are. You know, are you able to label them? Can you call them? I mean, look at how quickly young people now are apt to say they're they're suffering from anxiety when actually they're worried about something, which is natural. um we would have said, I'm bored, or no, just not feeling so great at the moment. That's not depression.
Mm,
You know, everything is so extreme. Those emotions are very extreme. But I think the earlier we could start with introducing children to that whole range of emotions, and also not making any emotion bad, just
yeah.
explaining that as humans we have this whole range, like a piano key. You know, there isn't one, is there, that is worse than the other one or better than the other one. It's just what comprises, you know, of a piano. And in
Yeah.
the same way, we have that whole range of emotions. And I think the earlier they can understand that it's okay, but also how to cope, how to deal with those emotions. So I think those are two very important things: being identifying our emotions, being okay, so accepting those emotions, and then knowing how to deal with them. So, how we come from a hot phase down again to a cool phase, how we can then think more rationally, how we can respond rather than react to things. So, when you suddenly reach 12 or 13 and you've never been taught any of this, and you know, and unfortunately, with social media and phones and things, I don't think children turn to their parents as much as they might have done in the past looking for answers. So they'll talk to their friends. They'll I mean, I would say Google, but obviously they're not. They would then put it into TikTok and then come up instantly, or maybe a chatbot or whatever, and come up instantly with a diagnosis, not a description of, sort of like rage and you're just upset because you saw your best friend sort of like talking to someone that you've fallen out with, or whatever it might be. It's kind of like understanding the emotions, but also why you're having them, and also how to describe them. So if you then ask your child, not in that first instance, but as the time goes, why do you self-harm? Or sexual promiscuity is is another one. A lot of it has to do with low self-esteem, low self-worth, no confidence, no self-belief, and where does all of that come from? And so it's the wrong question. Then it might be better to say, help me to understand, when you have that urge to harm yourself, what kind of emotions, what do they feel like?
Yeah.
Because it's easier to describe something in lots of words in a sentence than it is to put a word to an emotion. And that's that that's the communication styles that you see between an adult and a child. So I think we have to get more out of our adult head and break it down more for that child, for that young person, so that they're able to express themselves to us in a different way than we would adult to adult.
Really good point. And I was thinking of social media and things when you were mentioning it, and I was thinking that we we don't tend to feel our emotions anymore. If we're sad, if we're happy, we'll jump straight onto social media to suppress it or to tell people online. And we're not actually, as you said, feeling it and acknowledging what it is.
Yeah.
And it made me think of um, Netflix, I think it was,
Mm,
where it will get to the end of a film, and instead of hearing all the credits, it will go straight on to the next program. So you're
yeah.
not processing the emotions that have been brought up in a film. And I've really, really noticed that. And it doesn't seem very important, but you'll have something like Green Mile or ET or something that's very
Quite.
powerful on your
Yeah.
emotions. And years ago, we would sit there and process it through the
Mm,
credits. Now it's straight onto an action film or something
yeah.
else.
Yeah. we're
And we
not dealing we're
don't.
not dealing with our emotions, are we? We're never unpacking them. And also, when you spoke about how Netflix ends and then it goes straight into the next one, and there's just that countdown going, isn't there? Well, how did TikTok, not just its popularity, but they're all sound bites, aren't they? I don't know what the average length of those reels, those videos are, but I mean, you go from one straight into the next.
Yeah,
And so if we're, dealing with our emotions like that as well, the minute something not very pleasant comes up, we're going to swipe it away and ignore it and go to the next pleasure thing, something that's going to
yeah,
bring us pleasure rather than pain, because as we know, as humans, we're naturally inclined to move towards pleasure and away from pain. And it
yeah.
makes sense. I mean, no one wants to normally put themselves in pain, do they? um so all of those algorithms have been curated because by psychologists, because that understand the human mind and desires.
Yeah. I
And
know. Yeah. Go on.
yeah,
Mm.
and also, I was recently speaking on a podcast about Gen Z, and what was really interesting was that so Gen Z is from 1997 to 2012. So we're talking about 12, 13 year olds to, I think it's like 26, 27.
Right.
Yeah. So that age group, and that age group has been born into the age of technology and the phone, the internet, and all of that. So it's our first generation that has not known of a time before that, whereas we grew up and then had phones later on in life as they came out. I mean, I didn't have the first, there was Motorola or something, but it was a couple of years before I had my first mobile phone.
Mm.
And I mean, when you go out, you see it already, families and the youngest child that still can't walk. They've given them either an iPad in their hand or their phone, and then playing videos or a film or whatever as a pacifier.
Yeah.
So what messages are we sending out to our young people? One, that emotions or don't interrupt me, I'm too busy and I don't want to deal deal with um too many questions. When children are that sort of like between the age of 2 and 3, and then everything is, but mummy, why is that? I remember long car journeys and I think, oh God help me, mummy, why that, but why this, and you think, oh my God, aren't you ever going to just fall asleep or something and just give me a moment's peace?
Yeah.
um and then the distractions were coloring in books or Lego or blocks or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
um but we engaged more with our children. So when you think about communication, and I think it's small talk is underrated because there's an art to it, to be able to walk into any space, be able to make eye contact with someone, smile, and then start a conversation. you
Yes.
know we're social creatures, but where are the children supposed to learn that if every time we sit down to have a meal, it's not at the table, it's in front of the TV? And if when we go out for a family meal, everyone is on their devices, and then the children, when they you know, pipe up and say something, or they're just a little bit, they're full of energy, aren't they? The minute they get a little bit too loud, then we have to shut them up again with something else.
Yeah.
So when you think of that, all of that very subtle programming that we unfortunately, because we're never aware of our actions, we only ever see it 20 years later down the line, what the what that has produced.
Yeah.
And it's all very subtle, and then we look at the young people and we go, oh my God, what happened? But where do you think the helicoptering parenting, where do you think that was all going to lead? Where did you think that fix it mentality of wrapping our children up in bubble wrap and protecting them from life was
Yeah.
going to lead you?
It's funny. I always, we always say, don't we, when we're younger, I'm not going to turn out like my nan or my mum. And
Oh yeah, God forbid.
yeah. And just some of the things that I've heard people say recently, and I'm thinking just the generations. It's quite crazy. Me and my husband talk all the time about playing outside and climbing trees and yeah, I can just hear my nan in my head now. But it's so true. And of course, with the pandemic, that hasn't helped either, being locked at home inside. And communication is essential, being able to communicate with
It,
people.
it is, and I don't think we gave it enough credit before,
Yeah,
you
I think
know?
we've had a big shock,
Yeah,
especially say our generation of definitely. I think it's really shown us how important it is. Really, how
yeah.
important it is.
And so, we have the situation that we have. And I think the only way forward, I'm not going to say fix it because we don't want to be in fix it mode. So the only way we can address this problem is to one, identify it. And again, not a blame game, just identify, where we collectively as a society have gone wrong. And then how can we course correct? And it has to be in collaboration. It is no more about, top down authoritarian kind of like style. I mean, who likes to be bossed around? You're not going to see any hands go up in a crowded room, are you? So it's kind of like, and it's their world. And when you look at sort of like our leaders that we've got, I mean, I don't think we can look anywhere. It's bad enough in our own home country. And and I often look and I think, oh my gosh, if we I always look and smile and think a bunch of 12, 13-year-olds could run the country and come up with better policies that
Yeah,
are fairer and more compassionate than the politicians that we have. Yeah.
yes,
And I
absolutely.
think that's the key as well. If we have at the basis of everything that we do, if it's always coming from a place of compassion, when you're talking earlier about addictions and we talk about trauma, it isn't about pointing the finger and going, oh, look at them, what wasters, or whatever it is that one might like to say. It's kind of like, what happened to them? What happened to them that changed their trajectory in such a way that they are now homeless, that they are now an alcoholic, and or a drug addict, and and even self-harm. I mean, on average, where I'd said that self-harm normally begins on average at the age of 12, normally again on average by the time they're 17, it's over. Okay, but they're adults that self-harm.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that self-harming behavior, if you were cutting, it doesn't mean that that kind of behavior won't present itself in a different way when you're older, like with alcohol.
Sort of more acceptable
Boundary.
way.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's more socially acceptable, isn't it, to go out on a Friday night or a Saturday night and have a bottle of wine, and no one notices that you're not really eating as such.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a lot broader, but it's also like you had said as well, it's very subtle. And I don't think that in the times that we live in, where we're just constantly being bombarded, I mean, everything that you look at, where on social media, on the news, wherever you look, it's all doom and gloom. You're always in a state of anxiety, and
Yes.
it's become normalized to be anxious all the time, wondering where the next blow is going to come from, and then that existential angst. So it's causing an awful lot of stress.
Yeah.
And so you've got all of those things going on. And it is then really important to know how to best sort of like deal with that. But it doesn't surprise me that leads into addictions and self-harming behavior.
Well, that's it. And it's sort of going in circle again, but it drives me mad when I see people on social media or wherever. Because I mean, I don't watch the news anymore unless something big has happened.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to be brought down, and I don't want to live in that
Fear.
state of
Yeah.
anxiety, yeah, and fear because I felt it when I was watching it. I felt the shift in my mood. So, and I don't want to feel like that all the time. But when I see people saying, oh, people are throwing around the world word depression or anxiety, and they don't even know what it means, like you said, come from a place of compassion. Why are they drinking? Why are they self harming? What has happened to you? What is your story? Why do you think you're depressed? Um, and it might not be that they're depressed, but they don't understand the difference because they haven't been feeling it or expressing their emotions to understand what these feelings are.
But that might be their language as well. You
Yeah,
know, there are people that speak in extreme terms rather than I'm not feeling so great.
yeah,
You know, everything is a little bit more dramatized than, let's say. So that might be just their language. So it's also important to understand um, what is the communication style of that person, as well as, you know, as you rightly said, asking them, you know, well, why do you, you know, why do you feel depressed? You know, what do you think it might be? So you're not demeaning them or calling them out on depressed. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
yeah,
because it's so individual. There's circumstances where um, five people could be in a similar kind of like situation, and only one will feel depressed and the other one will just shrug it off. So you can't base it on that, and should never base anyone else's emotions on how you would react in that situation, because you're not in that situation. And even if you've been in what you think is that situation, it's only similar, it's not the same.
yeah,
And that should actually make you
absolutely.
more compassionate.
Yeah, that's it. And again, that's where communication is so important, isn't it? And realizing, noticing the differences because my husband is the biggest moaner in the world. He will moan about everything, but I know his moan from a moan when he's not feeling
Mm,
right.
yeah.
But that's because we communicate, and I know I you sense it in his body language, in tone of voice, certain words that he'll use, and that's through communication. When we moved to Wales, the internet wasn't up, and we said, and there was no aerial for the telly. And he said, well, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to have to talk.
Oh my gosh.
It was like, oh
Imagine.
no, when's the internet going to be back on? And it was strange. We just put the radio on and I was enjoying the music and we had a little chat. But that is because we communicate.
Mm.
We He doesn't have to say when he isn't right. So I think, yeah, noticing those cues as well, which you're not going to get on social media, that you're not going to get from your head in a screen. So,
No, and I think that's why we have to bring it back to family time, carving out family time. So, you know, as a working mother at the time, um, I made sure that at least every evening we had a family meal and it was cooked fresh.
yeah,
Okay, and then we would sit down, and no phones, no tech was allowed at the table, and then we would just talk about our day. So it's not, so again, you know, parents might say, well, what do I do? And won't that seem strange? But I mean, you can just say, listen, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if we then started to, and then, every evening, and, there's lots of activities. So, I mean, at least 2 evenings, then you could say, carve out a week on a weeknight to say, that's our family meal time, and we're going to sit down, have a lovely meal together, no phones, no nothing, and we'll just talk about our day. Because how many parents out there, once your child goes to secondary school, so for those listening that aren't familiar with that, that's from the ages of 11 to 18. So once they start big school, you notice as a parent that you don't actually know the teachers, because when they were in primary school, it was the one teacher that they had for each year group. And you
Yeah.
had that relationship with that teacher. But now they've got a teacher for every single subject. And the only time you ever get to see or speak to the teachers is on parents' evening. And then there's a clock ticking as well. So you never get to forge those deep relationships as you did before. You're not looking at their homework anymore. You're not helping them with their homework. So you're not perhaps dropping them off at school, because at some point they're not going to want you to be dropping them off at school and picking them up. They're going to want to, travel home the same way that their friends are, with the bus or the train or whatever. And it is important to give them that sense of independence as well. So
Yeah.
when you see it, there's a natural progression as they get older, that separation between the child and the parent. And that's natural, and we shouldn't try to smother them, but we just adapt. So the adapting means carve out at least 2 nights a week that's your family meal time. Carve out time at the weekend where you do something as a family. And again, you need to have the kids on board. So it's far easier if you just allow them to come up with suggestions that you then go, oh, okay, yeah, we can do that. No, we won't do that. Well, we'll do that next time, another time, you
Yeah.
know, and and just keep forging those relationships with them. And whatever there might be a TV show that they love. I mean, I remember watching Love Island with my daughters.
Yeah.
Would I have chosen to? I mean, they are really entertaining, but I mean, off my own back, I wouldn't have chosen to, oh, let me sit down and watch Love Island,
Yeah.
you know. But that's the important thing, again, about that adapting to them and wherever they happen to be in that phase. If you've got boys, if it's gaming, then try and show an interest. Well, show me, what is Fortnite about, and how do I do this and that? And they might go, oh God, mum, oh God, dad, kind of like thing. But you can laugh it off and make a joke of that.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about communication, it's the communication is that cornerstone of every relationship. And
Yeah.
in order to, I'm not saying that that's going to eliminate any kind of like harm or distress that might come to your child, but at least you've got that strong foundation already there in place. You're not having to build it now after the disaster has happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing that you're there for them when they
Yeah,
need you, when they feel strong
creating that.
enough.
Yeah, exactly. Creating that feeling of a safe space, that they know that even if I don't want to, I mean, I didn't tell my mother everything. So why are we expecting our children to tell us everything? But at least if they know that my door is always open, it doesn't matter what it is, just tell me. I prefer to know what it is. And then at least I can help. But again, help and fixing it, it's also important to ask, what support do you need from me? If it's just for me to sit here and listen, I'll do that. If you want a hug, that's fine. If you want me to just leave you alone, that's fine. I'm going to be downstairs. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to check in another sort of like, at 8 o'clock,
Yeah.
bring you up a cup of tea and then maybe let's have a little chat.
Yeah. Absolutely perfect because it can be so overwhelming as well, can't it? And
For both,
yeah,
for both sides.
yeah,
You don't want your child filled with dread that, oh God, here comes mum and it's the big conversation. You want to, and it does sound a little bit strange that when things aren't going so well and that you could make light of, a situation, but you can build in light moments. I remember picking my daughter up from school one time, or I think actually we took the day off of school and went to Chester Zoo. I didn't spend a moment, and it was a good 2 hour drive. I didn't spend one moment of that time in the car talking about what was going on because yourself, you don't always want to do post-mortems and go into, the depths of problems. You also want to just
yeah,
breathe, just be with someone and not always have that associated with you all the time. You don't want
yeah.
that following you around everywhere you go. And that look of concern.
And you don't always have to talk. Silence is so, so powerful. And silence can build a bond within itself and trust. If a bit of silence has to be filled with what's going on, as you said, or what's happening, why have you done this? People are going to be scared of silence. And that's when headphones are going to go in. They're not going to look up from the screens. And you won't get those opportunities to go out and just be together as a family or um yeah, or meal times, they won't
Yeah.
want to eat if they're anxious thinking a question's coming you're not going to
And
want
like I
to
said,
eat.
it's that look of concern as well. Even if the question isn't coming, it's that, and that you're under the spotlight. So you might as well
Yeah,
just ask the question because, you've already created that very uncomfortable atmosphere already. And I'd
yeah,
like to speak about the earphones because that's obviously a thing now. And it is very difficult for parents to speak to their teen because if they get in the car, the earphones go in, don't they? You might even say, listen, I'd like you to not spend all your time up in your room. It would be lovely if you could come down and just sit with us and watch the show. And they go, "Oh, okay then." And then they've got their blooming headphones in and the iPad out or something like that. It is okay to say, I'd rather you put that down so that we can actually have some quality family time together.
yeah,
And so it's really important, don't be scared. You can demand it. But when I say demand, it isn't in an authoritative way because what you're not trying to do is you don't want to push your teenager away from you. You want to create um that safety and that bonding. And also it's more than enough, say like you've picked them up from football and then how was it, and then the earphones go in, then you could say, you know again, I'd appreciate it, if you didn't whilst we're driving, and I'm just trying to have a conversation with you, so how was the football and how did it go, and they might go, oh God, and you just go, yeah, just you know just please me, just go with it.
yeah. That's it. And talk about your experience as a kid and your football. And when you were saying about the computer games and things. I mean, me and my brother love to bring up things like Tetris, and somebody said to me the other day, I can't remember. Actually, he's older than I am. He's 50, 53, and he said, "What's Tetris?" And I said, "You don't know what Tetris is?" And we had this big conversation about Tetris. And I know kids that I've been around teaching them what that is, and old school games and Sonic the
Mm.
Hedgehog,
Yeah,
and
exactly. And that's
bring
where
it in.
parents can really sort of like get into the world of their teenager, but not always in the learning. That's where we can also then impart our kind of like knowledge because, there's lots of retro things, aren't there, that they actually embrace, even the music.
Absolutely. Yes. There's
Yeah. So
always something.
every parent knows their child. So try to come in at their level, wherever they happen to be and whatever interests them, try and get an interest in that same thing so that at least that's a conversation point that you could have with your child.
Yeah. I
Be-
remember the first time I felt old, I was seeing somebody and they had an 11-year-old son. And I was probably 26. And they said, "I've just found this brilliant artist called Kylie Minogue." And I was like, "That, I am really old." And I think I was like 26. So
mm,
there's always something that you'll be able to relate to, as you
yeah,
said, with
it,
music or anything.
exactly. But also, it's very important to actually don't make the presumption that you know your child either. So I think it's very important, especially as they get older, is that curiosity of, I've got this individual in front of me. Who are they really? Because I think as parents, we don't take the time to actually get to know our children as individuals. How often do we make comparisons? Oh, he's so like you, isn't he? Or, she's so like, she reminds me of your sister, and how she. So we label the children. How are they ever supposed to develop their own personality, and how are we ever going to accept them if we don't actually bother to find out who they actually are and not who we think they are or who they should be? That's also pressure because, again, messaging, what is that saying to that child?
And it affects children when things like that are said. Or never wanted to be compared to my mother. And when I was growing
No
up,
one does.
no, but my mum looked really young, and everybody used to think we were sisters and we sounded very similar on the phone. And often a friend would ring up and plan to go out with my mum, thinking it was me. And we always had that. And I always had people saying, "You look like your father." Well, my dad died when I was 3 years old and he was the love of my life. So, yeah, my stepdad looks nothing like me. We might be about the same height, but that's
Yeah.
about it. So, yeah, being aware of those things, because it's one of those things that people say and it just slips out, doesn't it? We don't stop and think about
Well,
what we're
exactly.
actually saying.
So much of what we say doesn't go through any filter whatsoever, and so I'd learned about when I was doing my coaching about conscious parenting, and those are the principles then that I kind of like base my whole coaching and um, you know, dealings with other people on, which is, like it says, being conscious in that relationship, seeing your child as a sovereign being, so an individual in its own right, no labels, and saying, who are you? What makes you laugh?
Yeah.
You know, when you get up in the morning, what's the thing you'd love to do the most? You know, find out about who they are. What are their dreams? What are their aspirations? Not what your dreams are for them,
Yeah.
not where you want to shoehorn them into, or when they make decisions that wouldn't have been your decisions. That doesn't make it automatically bad.
Mm.
You know, they aren't carbon copies of us, and they shouldn't be either. So we have to allow them to become the person that they perhaps are destined to become, but also to allow them to figure that out. We can do almost like a brainstorming session, then they're allowed to bounce ideas off of us. And, what are you into at the moment? Oh, that's really great. Have you thought of, yeah, I have, but I'm not sure. Well, that's okay. But, that could be interesting, maybe.
Yeah.
It's
It plants a
kind of
seed
like,
for them as well, doesn't it? That there are options. They don't have to just do the route that the school says or the route that everybody goes down. It's
yeah,
when ideas are suggested, it gives an idea of freedom and independence to choose.
yeah. And you can just remain in your creative space, because it also doesn't mean that necessarily just because you're good at maths and I don't know, the sciences that you necessarily want to go down that route. And then what if it gets dictated down from the school that this is it? Then that's what you're told at the parents' evening. And the poor person, the child is sitting there going, but I don't want to do that. I want to do music. And then everyone's disappointed that you don't want to go down the academic route, and you'll never, well, what can you do with music? Well, who the heck knows? We've never explored that, have we? Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's um, that ever-present disappointment that so many children feel from their parents, whether it's overtly said or just in sighs and why don't you do such and such. So every time they perhaps make a suggestion or want to, let you know what they're thinking, instead of going with them, you go, oh, but why would you want to do that?
Mm.
That shuts the conversation down. And then you'll wonder why they don't actually come to you and share what their thoughts are, what they're going through, and you find out everything then when it's almost too late.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's amazing. Before we wrap up, tell me about your coaching and tell me about what you do.
So, as I said, I work with parents of teenagers who self harm and who are struggling with their mental health, and focusing primarily on the parents, because there are lots of schools out there that have amazing pastoral care. You can find, therapist or a counselor out there, because all of that needs to be unpicked. But if the parents, so you're doing all of that great work is happening for that young person, and then they come home and the parents aren't aware of how to keep their child safe. They aren't aware of the language that they're using. They're perhaps not aware of the dynamics. So I look at the dynamics in the home and what that messaging is. How are they speaking to each other? Again, it always comes back to communication. You know,
Yeah.
are they dismissive of each other? Or how do the parents react when they're angry, when they're disappointed? So it's always less about what you say, but what you do and how you act. And are you creating a safe space, and how to do it? And what do you want as your family values, in my house of, Jones, um, this is what I really value. And, like the family meals, for instance, and you can have like a monthly family meeting, sort of like check-ins to see how it's all going. And just because you might be dealing with one child, say like in a family of three children, it's really important that the other two, they're impacted as well, and they should have a voice at that table with family decisions as well. And it's not just that you're carving out that quality time with that one child, because if all of your focus is only on them, then before you know it, you've got two more problems following hot off, the heels of that one. And again, um, when you know that everyone, including, children, want and need to be seen, heard, accepted, validated. It it's funny, but the solutions are so simple. And I think sometimes they're discounted because you're looking for something far more complicated that you can then perhaps throw your hands up in the air and go, "Oh my God, well, that's never going to work, is it? I don't have the time," or whatever. So it's focusing on them and getting them to a place where they feel more confident, because they know now in those situations what they need to do, what the most important things are first, and then building that family structure, and also how to set boundaries, and that it is okay to say no. And also, your child needs you to be the adult.
Yeah.
Yeah. They need you to be strong. They need you to be able to say no, but it's not just saying no, it's also then saying why. And it's that negotiation. And you just have to, like I said, get out of that authoritarian kind of like, mode and mindset. It's kind of like, okay, because lots of times there's been like, about what's a reasonable time to come home. And you can just set the rules, but you set them with them. So you, as the adults, come up with the rules as you would like them to be, and then it's discussed with
Yeah.
with the child. So you might say on a weeknight, I think it's reasonable 8 o'clock to be home. Okay. And in the winter months, it's dark. So you're not walking home on your own. I'm coming to pick you up. So I need to know where you are, who you're with, and I need their numbers, because as a parent, it's my duty to keep you safe. I can't keep you safe if I don't know where you are. I can't keep you safe if I don't know, um, you know, how to contact that person or that parent
Yeah.
when they're with me. So again, the rolling of the eyes, and it's okay. Let it go. It's just kind of like, yeah, that's my job. I know it sucks. What can I say? But it's just what we need to do. And so you're negotiating
Absolutely.
all
And
along the way. And
yeah,
then hopefully they're going to grow up into amazing young people that you're
that's
going to have a great relationship with.
yeah, I think that why is really important because it teaches a lot. It explains, it makes it things reasonable. Just being told no doesn't get either of you anywhere. And I've always been the same. If I'm told no or if I'm told what to do, I really, really struggle. But if I'm asked because say in work somebody's sick or because people are under pressure or because if I'm just given that why I can process it then and I because I know why I will do it. Otherwise I feel like it's an authority
Ex-
pushing me down and
exactly.
being
And you
stomped
go
on.
straight into defensive mode.
Yeah.
Of course,
So,
no, the wall goes up.
yeah.
And what is the point? Like I said, parenting is a relationship of communication and negotiation. It's just the way it is. And I think the quicker we can accept that, the better the better relationships that we'll have. Where both benefit, the parents and the children.
Absolutely. Communication again.
You can't get away from it. You can't get away from it.
No.
And it's a
So
skill that we can all learn.
definitely, absolutely. So what is your website and how can people contact you?
So it's Shari Lewison-Frisch. So ShariLewison-Frisch. So you can find me on social media. I'm not on TikTok, but I'm on all the other platforms. Um,
Same.
and my two podcasts are Let's Talk About Self-Harm, and that's all just about, you know, mental health. But I talk to sort of like, family practitioners. There's an addictions counselor, so it's well worth a listen. And especially if you're the parents going through a tough time, that might be a good place to kind of like start. And then I've got another podcast called Toxic Masculinity Behind the Mask. And that's looking at men's mental health and how we got to where we are today and what part society, cultural expectations, traditional gender biased roles, all of that. How does that feed into the fact that, the number one cause of deaths in males, regardless of where you look in the world, is suicide?
Very, very important topic. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's on Spotify.
Fantastic. I will put all your links and everything, obviously, in the description and get it sent out to the world because all of those things really, really important topics. So I just want to thank you so much because it means a lot to have somebody talk about it. That's what I want to do is just bring light to everything and stop breaking down those stigmas that just having just reaching out, maybe not even saying anything, but just asking about people's experience can be that step forward to get into where people need to be. So thank you so,
Yeah.
so much for that.
No, no, you're welcome. It's one conversation at a time, isn't it? That's all it takes. Someone will find maybe some comfort in, what they've heard in our conversation, feel inspired perhaps to get the help that they need, or at least not feel like they're alone struggling with this. So thank you very
Absolutely.
much for
Thank
inviting me
you.
onto your podcast.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.